house was so large that silence lived in it like a permanent guest. Every sound echoed longer than it should have, footsteps turning into reminders of how small a person could feel inside so much space. The billionaire liked it that way. Silence meant control. Silence meant nothing unexpected could slip in. Each morning began the same. Curtains were opened at exactly the same time. Coffee was placed on the table at the same spot. Shoes were aligned perfectly near the door. The people who made all this happen were barely noticed. They moved quietly, learned to breathe softly, and spoke only when spoken to. Among them was a maid who had worked in the house for many years. Her hands were rough from cleaning, her back slightly bent, her eyes always lowered. She knew every corner of the house, but felt she belonged in none of them. She had a daughter who waited for her every afternoon. The girl usually sat near the gate after school, homework on her lap, watching expensive cars come and go. She never stepped inside unless her mother called her in for a few minutes. The guards knew her face, but never her name. To them, she was just the maid's child. The girl was quiet by nature. She noticed small things others ignored. She noticed how the billionaire's mood changed depending on which visitors arrived. She noticed which staff members avoided eye contact and which ones spoke too confidently. She noticed how certain men came late in the evening and left before dawn, always using the side entrance. She did not understand everything she saw, but she felt patterns forming in her mind. One afternoon, the sky was heavy with clouds, and the air felt tense. The girl had finished her homework early and wandered closer to the house than usual. A window on the lower floor was slightly open. Voices drifted out, sharp and urgent. She froze without meaning to. The voices were not raised, but they carried weight. One belonged to the billionaire. The others were unfamiliar. They spoke about numbers, deadlines, and something being moved sooner than planned. One man said it would look like an accident. Another laughed quietly and said no one would dare question it. The billionaire did not laugh. His voice sounded firm, but something in it felt pressured. The girl's heart began to beat faster. She did not understand all the words, but the tone scared her. She stepped back slowly, afraid of being seen, afraid of making a sound. When she reached the gate, she sat down as if nothing had happened. Her hands shook as she tried to hold her pen. When her mother finished work, the girl said nothing at first. They walked home together in silence. That night, while lying on the thin mattress they shared, the girl stared at the ceiling. The voices replayed in her mind. She wondered if she had misunderstood. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe important people always talked like that. Days passed, but the feeling did not fade. The men returned again, this time earlier in the day. The girl saw boxes being moved. She saw one of the regular staff members whispering nervously to another. She noticed guards being switched without explanation. Everything still looked perfect on the surface, but underneath, something felt wrong. Her mother grew more tired each evening. She complained of headaches and said the house felt heavy lately. One night she mentioned that people were being blamed for mistakes they did not make. Someone had already been sent away without warning. The girl listened carefully, fear tightening in her chest. The girl knew she should stay quiet. That was the rule of people like them. Do your work. Don't ask questions. Don't get involved. But every time she remembered the voices and the laughter, her stomach twisted. An unexpected moment came on a morning when her mother was asked to stay late. The girl waited inside the house for once, sitting on a small chair near the kitchen. The billionaire walked in alone, speaking on his phone. He stopped suddenly when he noticed her. The call ended quickly. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The girl stood up without thinking. Her mouth felt dry. She had practiced these words in her head many times. But now they tangled together. She spoke softly, almost like a whisper. She said she might be wrong. She said she had heard something she did not understand fully. She mentioned the late-night meetings, the boxes, the words about accidents. She did not accuse anyone. She only said she felt something bad was coming. The billionaire looked at her with surprise, then confusion. His face hardened slightly. He asked why she was listening to things that were not her business. His tone was calm but distant. The girl apologized immediately. She lowered her head and said she just thought he should know. He told her to return to the kitchen and not repeat such things again. His voice carried authority, the kind that ended conversations. The girl nodded and walked away, her legs weak. She felt foolish and scared. Maybe she had crossed a line she should never have seen that evening. The billionaire sat alone in his study longer than usual. He told himself it was nonsense. Children imagined things. Poor people misunderstood complex matters. Still, details from the girl's words echoed in his mind. Specific times. Specific movements. Too specific to ignore completely. Meanwhile, the girl could not eat. Her mother noticed and asked what was wrong. The girl said she was just tired. She did not mention the warning. She did not want her mother to worry or get into trouble. That night, rain fell heavily. The girl listened to it and wondered if she had made a mistake. She promised herself she would never speak up again. Some truths, she thought, were not meant for people like her, but somewhere else in the same house. The billionaire opened files he had not looked at in months. He told himself it was routine. Just checking. Nothing more. Yet a small crack had formed in his certainty. Planted by a quiet voice he never expected to hear, the house returned to silence, but it no longer felt peaceful. It felt like the calm before something that could not be stopped, and the girl, lying awake beside her sleeping mother, had no idea that her soft warning had already begun to change everything. Days passed after the girl's quiet warning, but the feeling inside her did not fade. She went to school, tried to laugh with her friends, and helped her mother at home. But her mind kept drifting back to that afternoon in the house. She had said something, and now there was a strange tension everywhere. The staff whispered more than usual. Some looked nervous when she passed. Her mother frowned at things she could not explain, moving with a heaviness that made her look older than she really was. The billionaire, meanwhile, returned to his routines. Meetings, calls, and schedules filled his days. At first, he tried to dismiss the girl's words. A child had no understanding of the complex dealings in his world. But then little details began to nag at him, small inconsistencies he had not noticed before. The boxes being moved, the changed security schedules, the subtle shifts in staff behavior, suddenly it all seemed connected. One afternoon he decided to watch more closely. Not openly, not like a visitor would, but quietly. He observed the staff, noting who seemed tense, who avoided eye contact, and who spoke too casually. For the first time in years, he looked at his own home from a different angle, from outside the walls of power and routine. And then he noticed Hertha girl. She was standing near the gate, doing homework as always, but her eyes kept moving, scanning, watching. He realized she had seen more than anyone else would believe. Her heart skipped a beat when she noticed him looking. He didn't speak, didn't gesture, just observed. She lowered her eyes quickly, pretending to focus on her notebook, but she could feel the weight of his gaze. Something in his look told her that he remembered. He was not angry, at least not in the way she feared. But something else was there: attention, interest, a recognition that mattered far more than she expected. That evening, her mother was exhausted from another long day. She complained of aches and a sudden tension in the air. The girl wanted to say something, warn her mother again, but she hesitated. She had promised herself she would stay quiet. Yet the pull of her conscience was strong. She knew she had to do something, but she didn't know what. The billionaire sat in his study, alone with the files he had reopened days before. His mind could not rest. He replayed the words the girl had spoken. The laughter of the men, the talk about deadlines, the mention of accidents, it made him uneasy. And the details the girl had added, the specific times, the movements of boxes, the unusual routines, they seemed too precise to be ignored. He tried to convince himself it was coincidence. Yet he could not. The next day he made an unusual request. He asked one of his most trusted assistants to bring the maid into the study. The maid, surprised and slightly afraid, entered quietly. The billionaire did not raise his voice. He asked about the daily routines, about any unusual events, and about what she had noticed in the past weeks. The maid hesitated, then answered honestly. She spoke of small things, little mistakes, odd timing, and the strange behavior of certain staff members. She avoided mentioning the girl at first, fearing trouble. He listened carefully, and then he asked about her daughter. The maid's eyes widened, but she nodded. She explained that the girl sometimes stayed after school, watched the household, and noticed things adults missed. She said the child was quiet, careful, and observant. She also admitted the girl had mentioned a worry about the recent visitors, but the maid thought it might be childish imagination. The billionaire's eyes narrowed slightly. He realized the child might have seen something critical. The careful way she had spoken, without fear, without exaggeration, suggested she had observed more than anyone imagined. He decided to act carefully. He could not ignore this. At the same time, he could not act openly and scare everyone or tip off anyone who might be involved. That evening, he instructed his security team to make subtle observations. Cameras were adjusted, movement was tracked quietly, and access logs were reviewed. He worked late into the night, for once personally involved in something that mattered more than schedules or profits. It was unusual for him to care so deeply, but the idea that someone might be plotting against him, someone he trusted, struck a chord he could not ignore. The girl continued her routine, unaware of the depth of his concern. She did not know she had made a difference. She continued to do her homework, to help her mother, to observe quietly. She did not speak of her warning again. She thought it was forgotten, just a small whisper in the grand house. A voice that no one could possibly hear, but the billionaire could not forget. He kept thinking about her words, her calm tone, her careful observations. He wondered how someone so young, so unimportant in the eyes of the world, could see clearly what others missed. He realized that sometimes courage came in quiet ways, and sometimes truth came from voices that were easy to ignore. The next few days were tense. The regular visitors arrived again. Boxes were moved, papers shuffled, and whispers traveled through the hallways. The billionaire watched quietly, noting discrepancies. He compared them to what the girl had mentioned. Every detail lined up, every movement had a pattern. He began to understand that her warning had merit. It was not imagination. It was observation, precise and real. The staff began to feel the subtle shift in energy. There was more caution, more fear in the air. Even those not involved noticed the change. The girl, as always, sat quietly near the gate, still doing her homework, still watching. She did not know she had started a chain reaction. She did not know that her words had already set things in motion. One afternoon, he asked her to come inside again. She hesitated at first, but then obeyed, stepping softly into the study. He did not scold her. He did not dismiss her. Instead, he asked gently about what she had seen, what she remembered from the past weeks. She spoke cautiously, carefully. She repeated only what she knew, only what she had observed, without opinion or fear. He listened, taking note of every word. It was the first time he truly acknowledged her, not as the child of a maid, not as someone insignificant, but as a person who had valuable insight. And for the first time, she realized her voice mattered. She had been afraid, yes, but the fear was replaced by a small spark of confidence. Maybe, just maybe, she could make a difference. That night, she went home with her mother. She felt different, though she did not fully understand why. The house seemed heavier, more tense, but somehow safer. She did not know the billionaire had already begun quietly changing schedules, watching movements and preparing for steps that could prevent disaster. And so, the girl's quiet warning, spoken softly and without expectation, began to ripple through the walls of power. No one else noticed yet, no one else understood, but the billionaire had begun to listen. And listening, he realized, was the first step toward understanding the truth. The house, which had once felt like a fortress of order and control, now carried a weight of quiet suspicion. The billionaire moved carefully, every step measured, every word considered. He could not openly accuse anyone, yet he could no longer ignore the warning that had been given by a child no one took seriously. He had begun to understand the value of observation, and he realized that sometimes the smallest voices carried the most important truths. He started with subtle checks. Guards were given new instructions without alerting the staff. Cameras were adjusted to cover blind spots. Movements of boxes and deliveries were tracked more closely. He examined financial records, inventory lists, and schedules with a scrutiny he had not shown before. Every discrepancy, no matter how small, was noted. His mind worked constantly, connecting patterns that others would never notice. Meanwhile, the maid's daughter went about her routine, unaware of the changes she had inspired. She still sat near the gate after school, notebook in hand, watching the house with quiet eyes. The staff began to feel tension in the air, whispers growing as everyone sensed the shift. Some avoided her, worried that she might know more than they expected. Others scowled when she glanced in their direction, as if she had somehow uncovered their hidden motives. She felt the unease but did not understand it. All she knew was that she had spoken once, softly, and somehow it had mattered. One afternoon, a small incident occurred that made the billionaire's heart race. A delivery had been made to the wrong floor, and a package intended for his office ended up near the staff quarters. At first, he thought it was an accident. Then he remembered the details the girl had mentioned: the late-night movements, the unusual boxes, the men who came and left quietly. He realized that the incident might not be random. He had to investigate carefully, without alarming anyone. He called in a few of his most trusted staff members for private discussions. Questions were asked subtly. Schedules were reviewed. Small errors were uncovered, files moved without permission, instructions ignored, and unusual communications that had no explanation. He began to see the outline of a larger problem, something that could have gone unnoticed if not for the warning he had received. The maid noticed the changes too. Her work had always been quiet, behind the scenes, but now she sensed a difference in the atmosphere. There was more scrutiny, more attention to detail, and a subtle tension that made the house feel heavier. She worried for her daughter, knowing that children who saw too much often found themselves in trouble. She thought about the soft words her daughter had spoken and wondered if she had placed them both in danger. The billionaire, however, realized that danger was not limited to him alone. Anyone who might be involved in wrongdoing would react when patterns were examined too closely. He had to act carefully, protecting those who were innocent while uncovering those who were not. He started documenting everything, taking notes of irregularities and preparing for the right moment to confront the situation. Meanwhile, the maid's daughter began to notice small things that added to her worry. Staff members were acting differently, some whispering in corners, some avoiding the usual routines. She saw men moving in ways that seemed secretive. Packages shifted to unusual locations, and conversations abruptly stopped when she approached. She felt a fear she could not explain, a sense that something bigger was happening around her. Yet she could not speak of it. She knew that speaking too much could bring trouble, and she did not want her mother or herself to be blamed for something she only partially understood. The billionaire decided to take a risk. He asked the maid's daughter to walk with him in a part of the garden he rarely used. He spoke gently, asking her what she had observed, trying to reassure her that she was not in trouble. She spoke carefully, repeating only what she had seen, without making accusations or guesses. Her words were precise, calm, and truthful. For a child, she carried herself with a clarity that astonished him. Her observations confirmed several suspicions he had already formed. He noted inconsistencies, unusual behavior, and movements that seemed deliberate. The girl mentioned certain staff members who seemed to hide things. She described events that had appeared innocent, but now made sense in a troubling pattern. The billionaire realized that the pieces were coming together because of her attention to detail, her quiet courage, and her willingness to speak despite fear. Over the next few days, he began to act. He rearranged schedules, adjusted surveillance, and quietly monitored the suspected individuals. He watched carefully to ensure no one would be harmed and no innocent person would be accused. He worked in silence, like a chess player moving pieces with thought and patience. Each action was calculated to uncover the truth without causing panic or chaos. The maid's daughter noticed small changes too. The house seemed stricter, yet more careful. She saw people behaving differently, some more cautious, others more nervous. She did not understand why, but she felt that something important was unfolding. She stayed close to her mother, offering quiet help around the house, and kept her observations private. She was beginning to understand that sometimes the smallest voice could influence events far larger than she ever imagined. Then came the first clear sign that the investigation was working. A staff member who had been involved in irregularities made a mistake, a small one but revealing. It allowed the billionaire to see the pattern clearly, confirming suspicions he had held quietly. He realized that without the girl's initial warning, he might never have noticed the small details that led to this discovery. The maid, sensing the tension, tried to protect her daughter without showing it. She moved with care, ensured her daughter stayed close, and tried to reassure her that everything was fine. Yet she knew, deep down, that the warning had set something in motion, something that could change lives. She did not yet know how far it would go, but she sensed the significance of what her daughter had done. As the days went on, the billionaire began to plan the next steps. He wanted to ensure that justice would be done, that those who were acting against him or the house would be held accountable. At the same time, he had to protect the innocent, including the maid and her daughter. He felt a responsibility he had not anticipated, recognizing that courage often came from unexpected places, and that the value of truth could not be measured by wealth or status. The girl, for her part, continued her careful observation. She noted who was honest, who was nervous, and who was hiding things. She watched quietly, never speaking more than necessary. But her mind worked constantly, piecing together details the adults overlooked. She was beginning to understand that she had an unusual responsibility, and that her words, when spoken carefully, could influence the course of events. The billionaire finally realized the full significance of the warning he had received. It was not just a child speaking, but a reminder that vigilance and observation could come from anyone, anywhere. The courage to speak, even softly and without expectation, had started a process that might protect him, his home, and those who were innocent from harm. The house remained quiet, but it was no longer peaceful. The presence of careful observation, hidden agendas, and cautious action created a new tension. Yet in that tension, there was hope. The hope that truth, patience, and careful listening could uncover what had been hidden and prevent disaster. The billionaire felt a respect for the quiet, observant child he had once dismissed. He knew that her warning had begun a process that could change everything, and he also knew that he could not ignore her. For in her words lay the first steps toward understanding and action. The house had changed since the girl had first spoken her warning. The walls, once filled with a quiet order, now carried a tension that made even small sounds feel significant. The billionaire moved carefully, alert to every detail. He had begun to see things he'd never noticed before, small actions and conversations that hinted at hidden intentions. Every day brought new patterns, and he realized that danger could be close to home, hidden behind familiar faces. He continued to act quietly, without alarming the staff or outsiders. Surveillance was adjusted, schedules subtly changed, and conversations carefully monitored. The process was slow and deliberate. He could not make mistakes. Any wrong move could alert those who had hidden agendas and put innocent people at risk, including the maid and her daughter. The maid noticed the change too. Her work had always been careful, precise, and unnoticed, but now she felt the tension in every corner of the house. Conversations that used to be casual were now cautious. Staff members avoided each other, whispered in corners, and moved with an unusual care. She worried for her daughter, knowing that children who saw too much could unintentionally become part of danger. She kept a close eye on her, urging her to remain quiet, to stay in safe areas, and to avoid drawing attention. The girl, for her part, had become more observant. She noticed changes she did not understand. Certain staff members seemed more nervous, more secretive. Packages were shifted to unusual locations, and whispered conversations stopped abruptly when she approached. She did not speak of it to anyone, fearing trouble, but she recorded everything in her mind. She knew her earlier warning had mattered, and she wanted to continue watching, even if she could not act. One afternoon, a subtle sign of trouble appeared. A delivery meant for the billionaire's office was moved by someone who had no reason to touch it. It was a small action, almost unnoticed, but it revealed a larger pattern. The billionaire recognized the risk immediately. He knew that someone was testing boundaries, and if left unchecked, the situation could escalate into serious harm. He decided to act in a measured way. He called and trusted staff members individually, asking questions indirectly, observing reactions carefully. Small errors were discovered, irregularities traced, and unusual movements documented. He did not confront anyone directly yet. Instead, he worked in silence, carefully preparing to reveal the truth at the right moment. The girl continued her quiet observation. She watched people closely, noticing who seemed honest, who acted nervous, and who avoided eye contact. Her mother worried that she might be too involved, but the girl could not help herself. She knew that danger might be close, and she wanted to see clearly what was happening. Every detail mattered. One evening, the billionaire received information that confirmed his suspicions. Certain staff members had been hiding actions and manipulating situations to their advantage. He realized that the warning he had received from the girl was not just helpful, it had been crucial. Without her careful observation, he might not have noticed the small signs that revealed the betrayal. The tension increased. Threats became clearer, though still hidden behind polite manners and smiles. The maid and her daughter felt a subtle shift in the household energy. People were cautious, careful, watching each other. The girl sensed that her warning had started a process she could not see fully, but she felt the weight of responsibility. She had spoken softly, but the effect was growing. The billionaire decided it was time to protect the innocent. He ensured that the maid and her daughter would not be harmed or accused of wrongdoing. He arranged for subtle safeguards, adjusting schedules, providing support, and making sure that any confrontation would not involve them. He realized that true leadership required care for those who had no power in the situation. As he continued his quiet investigation, he uncovered more evidence of the irregularities. Staff members who had seemed trustworthy were acting against him. Plans were revealed, small actions exposed, and the pattern of deceit became clear. Every move was calculated to avoid detection. But the girl's warning had started the chain of events that would now lead to the truth. The maid's daughter noticed subtle changes in the billionaire as well. He moved more deliberately, watched more closely, and spoke carefully. She sensed that he was aware of hidden actions and that he had begun to protect those who were innocent. Though she did not fully understand, she felt a growing respect for him, and a quiet relief that the warning she had given was being taken seriously. Days passed, and the situation became more urgent. The staff involved in the irregularities began to make mistakes, small ones that revealed their hidden actions. The billionaire recorded everything carefully, preparing for the moment when he could act decisively. The house, once silent and orderly, now carried a tension that suggested change was imminent. People moved with caution, aware that something larger was unfolding, though they did not know what. The girl stayed vigilant. She continued to observe, noticing details that adults overlooked. She recorded movements, conversations, and unusual behaviors in her mind. She did not speak unnecessarily, but her awareness grew sharper each day. She realized that her role, though small, was important. Her quiet voice had started a process. She felt a sense of purpose she had never felt before. The billionaire, meanwhile, began to prepare for a confrontation that would resolve the situation. He had gathered enough information to act decisively, but he knew he must wait for the right moment. Acting too soon could expose his plan and endanger the innocent. Acting carefully would ensure justice and protection for those who had spoken the truth. The maid worried for her daughter. She saw the tension, the cautious movements, and the whispers that suggested hidden agendas. She reminded her daughter to be careful, to stay close, and to avoid drawing attention. The girl nodded, aware that the situation was serious, but also understanding that her observations were valuable. She felt a quiet sense of pride and responsibility. Finally, a small incident provided the clarity the billionaire needed. A mistake by one of the deceptive staff members revealed their intentions fully. The pattern was complete. The danger was exposed. He realized that without the girl's initial warning, he might never have seen the full picture. The warning had begun a chain of careful observation, subtle action, and eventual revelation. The tension in the house remained, but now it carried a sense of control. The billionaire had begun to act. The innocent were protected, and the truth was coming to light. The maid's daughter continued her quiet observation, aware that her role had been significant. She understood that even a small voice, spoken softly and carefully, could change the course of events. The house, once a place of simple routine, had become a stage for hidden truths and careful action. The billionaire had learned to watch, to listen, and to value the courage of a child. The maid and her daughter remained protected, their quiet lives intertwined with events larger than they could see. And the warnings, spoken softly and without expectation, had set in motion a series of actions that would ultimately change everything in the house, revealing who was trustworthy, who was deceitful, and who deserved protection. The house felt lighter that morning. Though the air still carried the echoes of tension from the previous weeks, the billionaire had acted carefully, step by step, watching, documenting, and preparing. The deceit and irregularities had been uncovered, the pattern fully revealed, and the people who had hidden intentions were now exposed. Justice, quiet but firm, had begun to settle over the household. The maid and her daughter remained unaware of the full extent of what had occurred. They noticed only that the house felt different, as if the invisible walls of stress and caution had shifted. Staff members who had been nervous moved more freely now. The whispered corners of conversations returned to calm discussion, and routines flowed more naturally. There was relief in the air, though it was subtle. Like the first breath after a storm, the billionaire walked through the house, observing the changes with a sense of satisfaction. He felt a respect for the quiet courage of the maid's daughter, who had seen things clearly and spoken when it mattered most. Without her warning, he realized the deceit might have continued unchecked, and the innocent could have been harmed. Her small voice, once dismissed, had become the catalyst for clarity and truth. He called the maid and her daughter to the study. The child's eyes widened, unsure what to expect. The billionaire spoke gently, acknowledging her observation and bravery. He explained that her warning had been taken seriously, and that it had led to the discovery of problems that could have caused serious harm. Her mother looked at her daughter with pride. Seeing the courage that had been quietly nurtured in her, he assured them that they would remain safe, that no harm would come to them, and that their integrity was recognized. The girl felt a warmth of pride mixed with relief. She had acted with honesty, had spoken the truth despite fear, and it had made a difference. For the first time, she understood that even the smallest voice could influence the actions of those in power. The house began to return to its usual rhythm. But it was now marked by a deeper understanding. People were more careful, more honest, and more aware of the value of integrity. The staff had learned that deception could not thrive when attention and courage were present. And the billionaire, who had relied on wealth and authority for control, realized that true vigilance often came from unexpected places. The maid's daughter continued her daily observations, though now, with a sense of accomplishment and confidence, she understood the importance of careful attention, of watching, and of speaking when necessary. She had learned that courage was not always loud, and that a quiet warning could ripple through a world far larger than her own. The billionaire reflected on the lessons he had learned. He had always believed that power and control came from authority, schedules, and wealth. But he now understood that insight could come from anyone, anywhere, even from a child who moved quietly and spoke softly. He began to change his perspective, valuing honesty, vigilance, and courage over mere obedience. The staff, too, felt the impact of the resolution. Those who had acted deceitfully were removed or corrected, while the innocent were protected and recognized. The house, which had been a stage for hidden agendas and careful observation, now carried a sense of trust, respect, and responsibility. The balance had shifted quietly but firmly, and the environment was healthier for everyone. The girl's mother thanked the billionaire, though he waved off any grand acknowledgement. He was more concerned with fairness and protection than with praise, yet he could not hide his respect for the child who had spoken up. His careful attention had revealed truths that adults had missed. He recognized that the value of courage was measured not in loud actions, but in timely and honest words. Life began to normalize. The routine continued, but with a subtle shift. The billionaire continued his work, now more aware of the value of observation from all corners of his household. The maid and her daughter moved with ease, no longer fearful, no longer weighed down by tension. The girl continued to learn, to grow, to understand the power of quiet courage. The experience left a lasting impression on the billionaire. He began to listen more, to value the input of those who had previously been overlooked. He understood that wisdom was not limited to position or wealth. It could come from careful observation, from honesty, and from the willingness to speak up when it mattered. The girl's warning had changed not only the course of immediate events, but had shifted the way he viewed the world and the people in it. In the weeks that followed, small acts of recognition were made. The maid was treated with respect, her work acknowledged, and her daughter was given encouragement and guidance. Education, attention, and support became part of the environment the billionaire ensured for them. It was not charity, but respect for integrity and courage. The house, once a place of silent routines and hidden tensions, had become a home where honesty, careful attention, and quiet courage were recognized. The billionaire, having witnessed the power of a child's observation, continued to act with awareness, responsibility, and respect. The maid and her daughter lived safely and with dignity. Their voices valued, and their courage acknowledged, and the quiet warning, spoken softly and without expectation, had changed everything. It had revealed the hidden, protected the innocent, and reminded a powerful man that sometimes the smallest voices carried the greatest truths. The house continued in its daily rhythm, but nothing would ever be quite the same. Lessons had been learned, respect had been earned, and the ripple of a child's courage had transformed lives in ways that could never be forgotten. Life after the confrontation and the resolution had settled in the house felt different, yet familiar. The billionaire had regained his confidence, but it was tempered with a new awareness. He understood now that power was not just about wealth or authority, it was about observing, listening, and valuing people who often went unnoticed. He had learned that even the quietest voices could hold the truth that mattered most. The maid and her daughter continued their daily lives, but now with a sense of security they had never known before. The house, once filled with tension and whispered suspicions, moved with ease and calm. Staff members adjusted to the new balance, some feeling relief, others sensing the consequences of past actions. There was an unspoken understanding that honesty and careful observation would now be recognized and respected. The girl had grown slightly in the weeks following the resolution. She walked taller, observed with sharper eyes, and carried a quiet confidence. She still stayed near the gate after school, but now she did so without fear. She noticed how the billionaire moved through the house differently, how he watched more carefully, listened more attentively, and treated the staff with a sense of fairness that had been rare before. He began to involve her in small tasks, not chores, but careful observations that she could report on. He asked her to notice details in deliveries, movements of people, and minor irregularities that only someone quiet and observant could catch. She did this willingly, proud that her attention and honesty had a purpose. It was not work in the traditional sense, but it was trust, and that mattered far more. The maid watched her daughter with pride. She had always known her child was intelligent and observant, but she did not realize how much her quiet courage could affect the course of events in a world so far from their own. She smiled at small moments, seeing her daughter engage with the billionaire, watching as he listened to her insights with genuine respect. For the first time, she felt that their lives might be permanently changed for the better. The billionaire himself began to implement changes quietly throughout the house and the company. He adjusted oversight, improved communication, and created small systems that allowed honesty and observation to be rewarded. He knew that mistakes could happen, that deception could return. But he now had a method to protect the innocent and catch wrongdoing before it caused harm. He moved with patience, not fear, understanding that vigilance required both care and trust. The girl's perspective also began to shift. She realized that courage was not always loud and visible, but it was always significant. The smallest observations, spoken at the right time, could ripple out and change the course of events in ways she had never imagined. She carried this lesson into her school life, into her interactions with friends, and even into her quiet moments at home. She felt a responsibility to continue noticing, observing, and speaking honestly. Knowing that truth had power, the staff began to adjust to the new environment. Those who had acted deceitfully were no longer part of the household, and the remaining staff learned that honesty and careful attention were now valued. Some were cautious, uncertain of how much to reveal, but most adjusted quickly. Recognizing the shift in the Billionaire's leadership, the house itself felt alive in a new way, full of subtle energy and awareness, rather than fear and tension. The Billionaire also took care to protect the maid's daughter from the pressures of her new role. She remained a child in the public eye, allowed to play, study, and grow, while her observations were used carefully and thoughtfully. He understood that responsibility should not crush the innocence of a child, but it could guide her development in meaningful ways. He provided small guidance, asked thoughtful questions, and always listened with respect. Time passed, and the household settled into a stable rhythm. Yet, even in normalcy, the lessons remained. The Billionaire had changed fundamentally. He listened more, valued honesty over appearances, and respected the insights of those who were often overlooked. The maid and her daughter were safe, respected, and quietly proud of the role they had played in reshaping the environment around them. The girl in particular found new confidence in her daily life. She engaged with peers more comfortably, learned to speak when necessary, and carried the knowledge that her voice mattered. The lessons of vigilance, honesty, and courage were etched into her behavior and thoughts. She understood that even in a world dominated by wealth and power, integrity and attention could change outcomes. The Billionaire occasionally reflected on the events that had unfolded. He thought about the moments when he had dismissed the girls' warning, and he realized how close he had come to disaster. He valued the lesson deeply, understanding that humility, careful observation, and respect for all voices, no matter how quiet, were essential to leadership. He moved forward with a sense of responsibility, not only for his wealth and company, but for the people around him. The maid's life also improved quietly. She worked with dignity, recognized for her years of service, and her daughter's courage reflected back on her in subtle ways. The small family had stability, security, and respect, things they had never taken for granted. They continued to live simply, but with a profound sense of purpose and understanding that their voices and actions carried significance far beyond what they had imagined. The house became a symbol of vigilance and care, a place where honesty was valued and courage was recognized. The Billionaire ensured that trust and observation became part of the culture, not out of fear, but out of respect for the human quality that the girl had displayed. And she continued to grow, observing, learning, and understanding the impact of her small but powerful voice. In quiet moments, the Billionaire would watch the girl, sometimes smiling at her attention to detail, sometimes reflecting on the lessons of patience, vigilance, and humility. He understood that leadership was more than control, it was respect for truth, attention to detail, and valuing the courage of those who spoke softly but saw clearly. The maid and her daughter continued their lives with dignity and pride. Their small voice had changed a powerful man, reshaped a household, and proven that integrity and observation could overcome deception. They remained quietly influential, respected, and safe, their lives intertwined with the lessons of courage, honesty, and care. The girl now understood that her words mattered, that her observations could prevent harm, and that speaking the truth, even softly, could ripple out and change the course of events. She carried this knowledge forward, quietly confident, wise, beyond her years, and aware that her small voice had created a lasting impact. And in the Billionaire's heart, the lesson remained clear. Wealth and power could command respect, but it was truth, courage, and careful observation, sometimes from the most unexpected voices, that truly changed everything.
Ow.
The house, once tense and fearful, had become a place of vigilance, respect, and understanding, forever transformed by the quiet warning of a child who dared to speak when it mattered most.